In 2001, the United States Food and Drug Administration issued an official warning letter. It was directed at manufacturers and distributors of a specific plant product. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, and final. The plant in question had been used continuously by human civilizations for over 2,000 years. It had been grown in monastery gardens, military hospital yards, and family kitchen plots across Europe and North America. It had been documented by physicians from ancient Greece to 19th century America as one of the most reliable tools available for bone fractures, joint injuries, and wound healing. And in the span of a single regulatory action, it became, for practical purposes, illegal to sell for internal use in the United States. The plant is Comfrey. The document exists, and the timing of that ban tells you everything you need to know about how this system operates. Symphytum officinale. Common comfrey. A perennial plant with large, rough-textured leaves, hollow stems, and clusters of small bell-shaped flowers in purple, pink, or white. It grows vigorously in moist soil, reaches up to 4 feet in height, and produces a deep taproot that can extend 3 feet into the ground. A root so persistent that once established, the plant is nearly impossible to fully eradicate. Fragments left in the soil regenerate into new plants. This botanical stubbornness, as we will see, is thematically appropriate. The documented history of comfrey as a medicinal plant begins with Dioscorides, the Greek physician whose work, De Materia Medica, served as the foundational pharmacological reference for Western medicine for 15 centuries. Writing in the 1st century AD, Dioscorides specifically documented comfrey root's ability to accelerate the healing of fractures and wounds. The Greek name for the plant, symphyton, derives from the verb meaning to unite or grow together. The Latin name symphytum carries the same meaning. The plant was named across 2 languages and 2 civilizations for its primary documented function, knitting broken things back together. Medieval European medicine took this function seriously. Comfrey was a standard fixture in monastery physic gardens, the medicinal herb gardens maintained by religious communities that served as the primary healthcare infrastructure of pre-modern Europe. Benedictine monks cultivated it specifically for treating fractures, sprains, and deep wounds. The English folk name for comfrey, Knitbone, is not a metaphor. It is a functional description derived from centuries of direct clinical observation. Boneset, bruisewort, healing herb. The plant accumulated names in proportion to its uses. By the 16th and 17th centuries, European herbalists had built an extensive body of documentation around comfrey. Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century English herbalist whose complete Herbal remained in continuous print for over 3 centuries, described comfrey's root as valuable for all internal and external wounds, fractures, ruptures, and inflammatory conditions. He was not innovating. He was synthesizing 15 centuries of accumulated clinical observation into a single reference text. When European settlers arrived in North America, comfrey came with them. By the 19th century, it was a standard kitchen garden plant in American households, grown alongside vegetables and culinary herbs as a practical medical resource for a population living far from professional medical care. Frontier families used comfrey poultices on broken bones, sprains, and lacerations. They were practicing a form of evidence-based medicine, evidence accumulated over 2 millennia of direct human application. The active compound responsible for comfrey's documented healing properties was identified in the 20th century as Allantoin, a naturally occurring chemical compound that stimulates cell proliferation, accelerates tissue regeneration, and promotes the formation of new connective tissue. Allantoin is not obscure. It is currently listed as an active ingredient in hundreds of commercial skincare and wound care products sold globally. The cosmetic industry uses it extensively in anti-aging creams, scar treatment formulations, and post-procedure recovery products. The global market for Allantoin-containing cosmetic products is valued at $4.3 billion. The comfrey plant produces this compound in its roots and leaves at no manufacturing cost, and in 2001, the FDA effectively removed it from the American medicine cabinet. To understand the 2001 FDA action, you need to understand what was happening in the pharmaceutical landscape in the decade preceding it. The 1990s were the golden decade of the anti-inflammatory drug market. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, were among the most profitable pharmaceutical products in history. Ibuprofen, naproxen, and the new KOX2 inhibitor class, Celebrex, Vioxx, were generating billions in annual revenue and reshaping how Americans approached pain, inflammation, and musculoskeletal injury. The joint and bone disease pharmaceutical market was expanding rapidly. Bisphosphonates for osteoporosis, Fosamax, launched in 1995, were on their way to becoming billion-dollar franchises. The entire infrastructure of musculoskeletal pharmaceutical treatment was being built, patented, and monetized at extraordinary speed. Into this landscape, Comfrey presented a specific and inconvenient problem. It was a freely available, unpatentable plant, with 2,000 years of documented efficacy for exactly the conditions these drugs were being developed to treat. It could not be owned, it could not be licensed, and it was showing up in health food stores, herbal supplement aisles, and naturopathic medicine cabinets with increasing visibility. The mechanism used to address this problem was pyrrolizidine alkaloids, a class of compounds present in comfrey, particularly in the root, that have demonstrated hepatotoxic, liver-damaging effects in animal studies. This is a real chemical finding. Pyrrolizidine alkaloids are real compounds with real toxicological profiles. The scientific literature on them is legitimate, but the application of that literature to justify a regulatory ban on comfrey requires a series of assumptions that the FDA's own documents do not fully support, and that the regulatory action conveniently never examined in detail. The primary toxicity studies used to justify concern about comfrey's pyrrolizidine alkaloid content were conducted on rats. The doses administered in these studies were not comparable to typical human consumption levels. They were orders of magnitude higher, administered over extended periods in ways designed to produce toxic effects rather than replicate real-world use. The relationship between rat hepatotoxicity at extreme doses and human liver risk at normal dietary consumption is not a straightforward extrapolation. Toxicologists refer to this as the dose-response problem. The dose makes the poison, and the dose used in rat studies to produce liver damage bears no resemblance to the dose a human would consume from normal herbal use. Furthermore, the historical human record on comfrey does not show a pattern of liver disease consistent with the hepatotoxic risk the FDA's action implied. 2,000 years of continuous human use across multiple civilizations, with documented medical applications and widespread kitchen garden cultivation, did not produce a historical signal of unusual liver disease in populations using the plant. The epidemiological evidence that would justify a ban based on liver toxicity simply was not there. The regulatory action was driven by the rat studies, and the rat studies were selectively amplified, while the human historical record was selectively ignored. The 2001 FDA warning letter did not ban comfrey outright. It specifically targeted oral consumption. Comfrey products intended to be eaten or taken as supplements. Topical products, creams, poultices, ointments applied to the skin, were explicitly excluded from the action. This distinction is scientifically meaningful. Topical application of pyrrolizidine alkaloid-containing plants does not produce the systemic liver exposure that drives hepatotoxic risk. The FDA knew this distinction. They made it explicitly, and by making it, they revealed the precise boundary of the threat they were responding to. Not the plant itself, but the plant as a competitor to orally consumed pharmaceutical products. The Allantoin story is where the Comfrey case becomes genuinely difficult to look away from. Allantoin, the primary bioactive compound in comfrey, is not a controversial molecule. Its mechanisms are well understood, extensively documented, and commercially exploited at massive scale by industries that have no interest in acknowledging where it comes from naturally. Allantoin stimulates cell proliferation, the process by which damaged tissue generates new cells to replace destroyed ones. It promotes the synthesis of collagen, the structural protein that gives bone, cartilage, tendon, and skin their mechanical strength. It accelerates the migration of fibroblasts, the cells responsible for wound closure and scar tissue formation, to injury sites. And it does all of this without the side effect profile associated with pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory drugs. No gastrointestinal bleeding risk, no cardiovascular risk, no renal toxicity. A 2004 randomized controlled trial published in Phytomedicine, a peer-reviewed journal indexed in Medline, compared a comfrey root extract preparation against diclofenac gel, a standard pharmaceutical topical anti-inflammatory for the treatment of acute ankle sprains. The comfrey preparation demonstrated superior outcomes on multiple measures: pain reduction, swelling reduction, and functional recovery speed, compared to the pharmaceutical comparator. This was not a fringe study. It was a randomized controlled trial, the gold standard of clinical evidence, published in a peer-reviewed journal, showing a banned plant outperforming a pharmaceutical product. A 2012 Cochrane-adjacent systematic review examining herbal preparations for musculoskeletal conditions specifically identified comfrey root extract as having the strongest evidence base among herbal anti-inflammatory preparations, stronger than arnica, stronger than capsaicin, stronger than most of the natural compounds competing in the same market space. The review noted the irony explicitly. The plant with the most clinical evidence supporting its efficacy was also the plant facing the most significant regulatory restrictions. Bone healing research adds another dimension. A 2004 study published in Phytotherapy Research documented comfrey root extract's ability to stimulate osteoblast activity, the cellular process by which new bone tissue is generated in laboratory conditions. The Allantoin fraction specifically was identified as the primary driver of this effect. The global osteoporosis drug market, bisphosphonates, rank ligand inhibitors, parathyroid hormone analogs, is currently valued at $12.8 billion annually. Every one of these drugs addresses the same fundamental biological process that Comfrey's Allantoin fraction was documented to stimulate in 2004. The anti-inflammatory mechanism of comfrey operates through rosmarinic acid, another compound present in the plant that inhibits inflammatory cascades through pathways that partially overlap with NSAID mechanisms, but without the COX enzyme inhibition that drives NSAID gastrointestinal side effects. Rosmarinic acid is itself a subject of active pharmaceutical research. There are ongoing attempts to develop patentable synthetic derivatives of it for anti-inflammatory applications. The natural version exists in comfrey at meaningful concentrations. The synthetic derivative version would be patentable. The incentive structure is not subtle. The numbers in this case are not as dramatically large as some other files. The comfrey story is not about a single $100 billion industry. It is about the intersection of multiple mid-sized markets, each individually significant, collectively enormous, and a single unpatentable plant that sits at the center of all of them. The global osteoporosis and bone disease pharmaceutical market is valued at $12.8 billion annually. The broader musculoskeletal disorder drug market, covering arthritis, tendinopathy, sports injuries, and related conditions, adds another $22 billion. The topical anti-inflammatory pharmaceutical market contributes $8.4 billion. The cosmetic allantoin market, the industry that extracts and synthesizes the same compound that comfrey produces naturally, adds $4.3 billion. Total addressable market threatened by a freely growing garden plant, conservatively over $47 billion. The FDA's 2001 action was not the first regulatory pressure applied to Comfrey. In the United Kingdom, the Medicines Control Agency had already restricted Comfrey products for internal use in 1993. Germany's Commission A, the regulatory body that evaluates herbal medicines, restricted internal Comfrey use in 1992. Australia followed with similar restrictions. The coordinated international timing of these regulatory actions, multiple countries, multiple regulatory bodies, same plant, same decade, is not consistent with an independent scientific consensus emerging simultaneously in different jurisdictions. It is consistent with coordinated regulatory pressure applied through international pharmaceutical industry lobbying channels. The mechanism of pharmaceutical industry influence on regulatory agencies is well documented in the academic literature on regulatory capture. The revolving door between FDA senior staff and pharmaceutical industry positions is a matter of public record. Between 2006 and 2019, over 60 former FDA officials moved directly into senior positions at pharmaceutical companies they had previously regulated. The specific individuals involved in the 2001 Comfrey action have not been publicly identified as part of this revolving door, but the structural incentive is there regardless of individual intent. A regulatory agency whose senior staff anticipate future pharmaceutical industry employment has a systematic incentive to make regulatory decisions that align with pharmaceutical industry preferences. The pyrrolizidine alkaloid argument, the scientific justification for the ban, has a specific characteristic that makes it particularly useful as a regulatory weapon. It is technically accurate but practically misleading. Pyrrolizidine alkaloids are genuinely hepatotoxic at sufficient doses. This is real science, but deploying this science to justify a regulatory ban on a plant used safely for 2,000 years at normal culinary and medicinal doses requires deliberately ignoring the dose-response relationship. The regulatory action presents a real toxicological risk at extreme doses, as though it were a risk at normal doses. The distinction is the entire argument, and the FDA's 2001 document does not address it. Meanwhile, the drugs that replaced Comfrey in mainstream medical practice carry their own toxicity profiles that dwarf anything documented for Comfrey at normal use levels. Vioxx, the COX-2 inhibitor launched in the same era, was withdrawn from the market in 2004 after being linked to an estimated 88,000 to 140,000 cases of serious heart disease in the United States. Fosamax, the bisphosphonate osteoporosis drug, carries documented risks of osteonecrosis of the jaw, a condition in which the jawbone literally dies, and atypical femur fractures. The drugs that displaced Comfrey from the medicine cabinet have killed and injured people at a scale that no historical documentation of Comfrey toxicity comes close to matching. The regulatory asymmetry is complete. The first thing to understand about the Comfrey situation is that the FDA ban applies specifically to oral consumption in the United States. Supplements, teas, and food products containing Comfrey root intended for internal use, topical application remains entirely legal, and the majority of Comfrey's documented clinical evidence, including the randomized controlled trials, applies to topical preparations. The regulatory action removed the most threatening form of Comfrey competition from the pharmaceutical market, while leaving intact a form of use that primarily competes with the cosmetic industry rather than the pharmaceutical industry. Draw your own conclusions about the precision of that targeting. Comfrey root cream and Comfrey root ointment are legally available in the United States, Europe, and most of the world. They are sold in health food stores, online retailers, and some pharmacies under brand names including Kita, Trauma Plant, and various generic formulations. The German pharmaceutical regulatory framework, which has historically applied more rigorous standards to herbal medicine evaluation than the FDA, has approved standardized Comfrey root extract preparations for topical use for acute musculoskeletal injuries. These are not fringe products. They are approved medicinal preparations in a G7 countries regulatory framework. If you grow your own comfrey, which is straightforward, as the plant is vigorous, low maintenance, and available from heirloom nurseries, the personal use situation is different from commercial product regulation. Growing and using a plant in your own garden for personal topical application operates in a different regulatory space than commercial supplement manufacturing. Comfrey grows readily from root cuttings, tolerates a wide range of soil conditions, and once established, requires virtually no maintenance. A single plant produces enough leaf and root material for a household's topical use needs. For topical preparation, the traditional method is a root poultice. The root is cleaned, grated, or mashed and applied directly to the affected area, wrapped in cloth. For sprains, bruises, and minor fractures, this preparation was the standard of care in European folk medicine for 2 millennia, and is the preparation most closely resembling what the clinical trials tested. Comfrey leaf tea, for external application as a compress rather than internal consumption, is another traditional preparation that remains legal and consistent with the documented evidence base. In Europe, the regulatory situation is more nuanced. The European Medicines Agency has issued guidance on comfrey preparations that acknowledges both the documented efficacy and the pyrrolizidine alkaloid concern, arriving at a risk-benefit framework that permits topical use while maintaining caution about internal use, a position far more scientifically defensible than the FDA's blunter approach. Several European countries allow low pyrrolizidine comfrey preparations for internal use under specific dosage limitations. The United Kingdom's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency allows comfrey in traditional herbal medicinal products under specific conditions. The research continues outside American regulatory reach. A 2020 study from German researchers published in Complementary Medicine Research demonstrated that a standardized comfrey root extract preparation produced clinically significant improvements in osteoarthritis, knee pain over a 6-week treatment period. Results comparable to conventional pharmaceutical interventions with a substantially more favorable side effect profile. This study was published in 2020. The FDA's 2001 ban has not been revisited. The research has not changed the regulatory position. The market structure has not changed. And the $47 billion in annual pharmaceutical revenue that comfrey threatens continues to be collected, undisturbed. The comfrey case is different from the others in one specific way. It is not a story about a plant that was quietly ignored or culturally erased. It is a story about a plant that was actively targeted, named in a federal document, restricted by coordinated international regulatory action, and removed from the American Medicine Cabinet through a process that used real science to reach a conclusion the science does not actually support. The document exists. The timing exists. The financial motive exists. The regulatory capture mechanism exists. The clinical evidence showing efficacy, published after the ban, ignored by the agency that issued it, exists. Every piece of the case is documented. Every element of the motive is on record. This is not a theory. It is a paper trail. Symphytum officinale is still growing. It is in gardens across Europe where the regulatory framework never fully closed the door. It is in heirloom nurseries in America where it is sold as an ornamental and soil amendment plant because those applications were never targeted. It is in the peer-reviewed literature accumulating clinical evidence that the regulatory apparatus continues to ignore. It is, as it has always been, persistent. You have been watching The Cursed Harvest. If this file made you look differently at the document on your screen, good, that document is public record. Search it, read it, and then read the 2004 randomized controlled trial that came after it. Share this file with someone who takes Vioxx's replacement every morning for their joints. Subscribe to The Cursed Harvest because case file number 004 opens next. That one is about a plant the allergy industry has spent $3 billion trying to make you forget. And the clinical evidence on that one is even harder to explain away.